Welcome everyone. My name is Kevin Kester. I'm a cattleman from Parkfield, California, and currently serve as Vice President of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I am pleased to welcome you to NCBA's End of the Year Policy Update webinar featuring our team in Washington, D.C. It has been an unpredictable election season, and now that the votes have been cast, we must continue to work within the political and regulatory environments to ensure a strong future for our industry. We look forward to hearing from experts on several priority areas for NCBA, including environmental issues, trade, endangered species, and more. As a participant, your line will be muted, but feel free to type in questions in the question box on your screen, and at the end of the presentation, we will have a chance to answer several of your questions. If you have trouble with your technology, or if you are joining us only for the audio, the webinar is being recorded and will be available in a few days at beefusa.org. As I mentioned, we have several members of the NCBA team in DC joining us tonight. We will start the update with our Chief Lobbyist, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs, Colin Woodall. Colin?
All right, thank you, Kevin, and thanks for all of you joining us here this evening. Hope this finds you well. This is a great opportunity for us to take the time to give you a little update here out of Washington, D.C. As everybody has watched here over the past couple of weeks, it's definitely been exciting given the election and the results from the election. So we wanted to start off by just doing a quick overview of the results of November 8th. And how that's going to impact all the discussion that we're going to have here tonight. On the screen in front of you, you will see what looks like an awfully messy version of the United States. This is, of course, the results of the most recent presidential election, and the states have been morphed in order to show you how the states influence the process based upon not only population, but therefore also the electoral votes. Now, it's no surprise when you look at the West Coast with California, Oregon, Washington, and of course the Northeast, which have historically been strongholds for the Democratic Party. And the way that President-elect Trump ended up winning this election was by focusing on the upper Midwest. So when you look at Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, his effort to be able to turn out that vote and to turn them in his favor is what ultimately carried the day for him. Now, this is an extremely important election, not only for what the president brings, but for what else comes with this election. So it's not only the appointment of almost 4,000 federal appointees, but it also comes with at least one Supreme Court justice nominee. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is the process that the president-elect is going to have to go through in not only nominating potential nominees for all of these positions, but also going in and trying to fill out the rest of the government. There are about 4,000 positions that the president has to fill. Of that, about 25% actually require the confirmation of the United States Senate. So as we look at the next couple of months, it's going to be filled with a lot of hearings, a lot of questions, as you can imagine, of these nominees, and then ultimately hope a speedy confirmation process in order to make sure that the government is populated, and then we can therefore get to work. We're having issues with this. Now, I do believe that there might be a few technical issues here with the map. Hopefully right now you are looking at the one that talks about the United States Senate. The Senate was an area where we were expecting some significant losses for the Republican Party. The Democrats, however, were very tenacious in their fight for control or regaining control of the Senate, and we saw that with the pickup of a couple of seats from the Democratic Party. Illinois, New Hampshire being two of those seats. But it was not enough in order to take away the majority control for the Republicans. So the Republicans do retain control of the Senate, and why that is important is back to my previous comment about the nominees. Some of you may remember a couple of years ago when Harry Reid was the majority leader of the Senate. When the Democrats were in control, they changed the process of what's called the filibuster. The filibuster being the process that is used in the Senate to slow things down and to ultimately require 60 votes to pass anything of importance. Now, the change was made to take it down from 60 votes to a simple majority, being 51, to confirm nominees. At the time, the Republicans were extremely unhappy about that, but the fact is now that they are in charge, and now that there is a Republican administration, it means that they have the opportunity to probably expedite most of the nominees coming through the Trump process. The only exception to that has to do with the Supreme Court Justice nominee, where the 60-vote threshold is still very much alive. Is it not working? All right, while we work on our slides here, we're going to go ahead and talk about the House of Representatives, because the House of Representatives was also a hotly contested set of races where the Democrats did pick up several seats. They did take down the majority that the Republicans had, but it was not enough to eliminate the Republican majority. When you talk about the House, you have to have 218 votes in order to control the messaging. And the Republicans were able to do that by keeping the Democrats down to 194 seats. So with that, the Republicans still have the opportunity to keep the speakership, which will remain in Speaker Ryan's hands. They also have the ability to keep all of the chairmanships. Now that's extremely important to us, because when you look at things such as the Farm Bill, the next Farm Bill, which will come up here probably with field hearings at the end of spring, early summer of 2017, having the Republicans control both the House and Senate agricultures will be extremely beneficial for us as we try to pass all of NCBA's policy priorities. Now let's go ahead and start talking about some of the specific issues that we are dealing with. One in particular, and one that's of course been on the mind of many of you, is just the simple situation with the cattle market. We have seen a tremendous amount of volatility, and as a portion or as a part of that, we've had the opportunity for establishment of the NCBA CME working group to meet not only with the CME but also with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and a lot of stakeholders within the industry to make sure that we try to find ways to improve cattle contracts, especially the live cattle contracts. Right now, the NCBA CME working group has divided up into 3 specific subgroups, one looking at price discovery in order to try to find ways to increase the transparency. So that means that we're working on looking at improvements to mandatory price reporting and also spending a lot of time trying to promote the Fed Cattle Exchange, which has been put forward by Superior as a weekly online auction of fed cattle to be sold in the cash market to the packers. We've had a lot of success with that, and we do believe that's going to go a long way in helping us address this issue of volatility and overall market transparency. We also have another subgroup looking at contract specifications, trying to find ways to increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of CME's live cattle contract, and then ultimately, of course, trying to address this issue of volatility, knowing that the switch from open outcry cattle pits in Chicago to electronic and automated trading has caused a lot of consternation. And we are still trying to work with not only the CFTC but also with the CME to try and find ways to address that. One of the things that we've asked for is more information on who's actually in the market these days. We have not been successful in getting that out of either CME or CFTC. And so we are hoping that with the new administration we may have some new approaches to find ways to help address this issue. One thing that just happened we want to take the time to update everybody on is that the Gypsy rule was published. For those of you who have been involved with NCBA, You know that we have been fighting this since 2010. The Gypsy rule is a result of language that was included in the 2008 Farm Bill, which originally was focused on some very specific items of the Packers and Stockyards Act. Unfortunately, under the Obama administration, they expanded that and made their overall provisions so broad and general that it brought in all of us as livestock producers and really attacked our cattle marketing opportunities. So what do I mean when I say that? This Gypsy rule basically defines what is fair in cattle markets. I think all of you have heard us say before that we don't trust the government to do much of anything right these days, much less go forward and define what is fair in cattle marketing. So when we talk about that fairness and the broad nature, broad definition of this rule, it means that if one producer just thinks that it's unfair that his neighbor is getting a premium based upon some sort of value-added product, this rule is written so broadly that they could utilize their trial attorney friends to file lawsuits against several people within the beef production chain. So basically this becomes a trial lawyer's dream. It opens up a significant amount of liability, and the packers and the processors have made it very clear that with that kind of liability, that the programs that we as a cattle industry have worked so hard to put together over the past several years, value-added programs, could very well go away. When you look at the downtrend in the market that we have been suffering through over the past 18 months, the last thing we need is to jeopardize some of the value-added programs that have been very good at providing premiums to producers who are involved. We had worked very diligently over the past several years to kill this. We had thought that we had achieved that until earlier this year when Secretary Vilsack came out and said that he was going to dust this off and bring this back forward. He said he was going to change it and make sure that it didn't impact us. Unfortunately, he did not change it enough. So the rule came out yesterday. It's going to be published in the Federal Register next week, and it is just as bad as the initial rule. And so we are working right now to try to find ways to get the President-elect's administration engaged here to see if President Trump will take an interest in this, try to stop this, and also start working with the new Congress, which comes back to town on January 3rd, to try to find ways to stop this. We have to maintain our ability as cattle producers to market cattle the way we want to. This rule takes that away from us. So just want to make sure everybody knew that that is a very recent development as of yesterday, and we will keep you posted as we learn more. So moving forward, one thing that everybody needs to be reminded of, I think, is the very close relationship between the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the Public Lands Council. That relationship has been successful for many years. It's probably the strongest now than it has been for quite some time, thanks to the cooperation between the officers of the PLC and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the PLC staff here in Washington, D.C. So to talk about the next set of issues, I'm going to turn it over to Ethan Lane, who is the Executive Director of the Public Lands Council. Ethan.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. First and foremost, I want to talk about a few of the issues that we're wrapping up here at the end of this year before we go into what we're looking at moving down the road, headed into 2017. This is something I talk about quite a bit as I move around the West, talking at various cattlemen's conferences. If you look at the map before you on the screen right now, it gives you an idea of the footprint of the range of the greater sage grouse and the planting area for the greater sage grouse. Now, obviously, this was an issue of primary concern to the Public Lands Council and NCBA this year. We had language in the National Defense Authorization Act headed out of the House of Representatives and into the conference committee at the end of this year that would have prevented the implementation of those restrictive resource management plans anywhere where existing state management on the ground was successful, and it would have returned that determination of consistency between federal and state management back to the governors of those individual states, because we know that those governors on the ground are the best place to make those decisions on what's best for the species under their control. Unfortunately, along with a lot of other priorities for industries around the country, the sage grouse language Congress failed to include in that National Defense Authorization Act that finally passed the full House and Senate and was sent to the President last week. Beyond the opposition from Senator John McCain, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, we experienced quite a bit of vocal opposition from radical environmental groups like the Western Watersheds Project, Center for Biological Diversity, as well as this new breed of what we're calling green decoy sportsmen's groups, like the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership and the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Trout Unlimited, the list goes on and on. These are groups that are funded by the same people that fund Western Watersheds and the Center for Biological Diversity. They've just figured out that they can appeal to a broader audience if they cloak themselves as sportsmen, like many of the people on this call. We'll be working as we move into next year to counteract that messaging on the Hill and make sure that legislators understand the reality of that situation in the West and in the rest of the country as we see some of those influences spread west with the Endangered Species Act debate, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. We're going to continue to press that message that unless the current federal plans are blocked in order to allow state management to continue, we're going to see increased fuel loads across the West and increased wildfire threat headed into this summer. So we'll continue to press that message on Capitol Hill. We've been doing that for the past few weeks. What you're seeing on the screen now in front of you is a full-page ad that ran in Roll Call magazine last week. The message to Congress is clear. This is not a situation that can be resolved simply by the new administration coming in and rolling back these plans. Anyone who deals with federal resource management planning knows that a resource management plan simply can't be rolled back. We need Congress to intervene now to roll these plans back and provide some relief so that the existing state management can continue, and that's what we'll continue to press throughout this year. Deference must be given to that state management instead of intrusive federal management plans. Beyond the sage grouse situation, which will continue to unfold, we have a variety of other priorities that are impacting cattle, livestock operators in general throughout the West. In the last week, we've seen the BLM finalize the BLM Planning 2.0 rule. This is something we talked about quite a bit back in the spring. This is a broad reorientation of the resource management planning process within BLM. Essentially, what the BLM is saying with this process is they want to move away from planning for multiple use and sustained yield and start to what they say is better respond to social and environmental change. Now, there's no real clear definition of what they mean by social and environmental change, but I think everyone watching this webinar can intuit from that pretty much the direction they're wanting to head. The BLM has a mandate to manage for multiple use and sustained yield, and we'll continue to press them to keep an eye on that as they move forward. Among the many items that we disapprove of in the Planning 2.0 rule as it was finalized and in contravention to the substantive guidance we provided during the comment period earlier this year, they further reduced comment periods to as little as 30 days in some cases, which in our minds is completely inadequate, particularly when dealing with pages of hundreds of pages of documentation that can be produced by these agencies during these planning processes. They'll spend a year to produce a document, and then they expect the general public to review that document and comment substantively in 30 days, which we feel like is completely unacceptable. Additionally, the BLM Planning 2.0 in its final form reduces the role of state directors, which for anybody dealing with these processes, we know that state directors oftentimes can be the best conduit of information between the on-the-ground managers and staff in Washington, D.C. To eliminate them from this process in an effort to expand to what the BLM and the Department of Interior in general is calling landscape scale planning really further reduces that local input into processes, which can be particularly problematic in counties that have as much as 80 or 90% federal land in their backyard. Additionally, BLM Planning 2.0 eliminates specific requirements for economic analysis, which further weakens that local input and the requirement for BLM to assess just what these federal regulations are going to do at the local level to rural economies. There's simply no other option. Planning 2.0 must be thrown out, and we must start over in order to get a result that works for all multiple uses in the West. Moving into next year, we'll be pursuing a variety of key reforms with the new administration and the Republican majorities in the House and Senate. Top of that agenda is reform to the Endangered Species Act. We know that the Endangered Species Act is a broken law. At this point, we have more than 2,100 species listed, about half of those international species, the other half domestic species. Of those domestic species that are listed, just shy of 49% have functioning recovery plans in place. That means for 51% of the species listed domestically and impacting producers around the country, We're dealing with the restrictions of a listing without any path forward or benchmarks for success from the Fish and Wildlife Service. Part of this is due to the litigation environment that we'll talk about in a little while, and the relentless pressure from radical environmental groups on these agencies to submit to their will through a variety of legal tactics. Some of them leveraging resources like the Equal Access to Justice Act and the ESA Judgment Fund. But also there's the simple fact that, it's easier for the Fish and Wildlife Service to move away from those pressure points of litigation than to deal with the hard work of recovering those species and delisting them in an orderly fashion. So we'll be pursuing that line with the new administration, talking to the new incoming Secretary of Interior, Ryan Zinke, and his staff as he builds it out to make sure that there's some attention paid to this issue and that we get some relief from some of these species that don't belong on this list anymore, whether it's the gray wolves throughout the West or grizzly bears up by Yellowstone National Park. It's time to delist some of these species that are recovered and move on to focus on species that really require our attention. Another item to focus on that goes hand in hand with the Endangered Species Act is the National Environmental Policy Act. Now, nobody operating on federal land is unfamiliar with NEPA. NEPA guides almost everything you do on federal land. It's gotten to the point where for many of us, it feels like you can't swing a gate open west of the 100th meridian without running through a National Environmental Policy Act process before you do so. There's a substantial amount of reform that's required to NEPA in order to make it more responsive to the needs of the environmental community, but also to cattle producers and sheep producers operating on public lands throughout the West. We need to enhance that state and local input role, and we need to further define what a stakeholder is. A lot of times what we're seeing is that whether it's the general public or applicants, environmental litigants that are inserting themselves into the process, they're granted the same seat at the table as producers that hold a federal grazing permit. As a federal grazing permittee, you have a business relationship with these agencies. That should absolutely supersede the rights of an individual or group that's not connected to that environment and not impacted by this planning process. And we'll continue to discuss that as the administration starts to populate with new employees. We also are going to continue to work on the consistent formulation and application of alternatives. Often in these processes, what we see is a manipulation of that process to the benefit of outside interests that are interested in getting a result that reduces multiple use on these landscapes. And finally, none of these issues can be really resolved in a substantive way until we deal with litigation. As I've talked about for the last few minutes here, offensive litigation by the environmental community is absolutely crippling decision-making at the Department of Interior and the U.S. Forest Service. And as we heard from Colin earlier, also in other parts of the USDA, whether it's in the Gypsy rule or anywhere else. Until we get a handle on offensive litigation and until we start to curb the financial benefit these groups receive from engaging in these lawsuits, these agencies are going to be unwilling to really move forward with their agenda in a productive and substantive way. We need to start getting transparency on payments to environmental litigants. We need to put rate caps in place so that they can't make more money than they should from pursuing these abuses. And we need to work on the eligibility to receive compensation so that it really is only eligible to those who need it. This program and many of these programs were designed for veterans and Social Security beneficiaries to make sure they're getting their checks and the benefits they deserve. They weren't designed for multi-million-dollar environmental groups to use as their piggy bank to pursue their agenda. And we need to increase standing requirements so that if you sue on one of these situations, you have the right to be there and you're actually impacted. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kent Backus. He's going to talk to us a little bit about the current situation with trade. Kent?
Thank you, Ethan. Good evening, everyone. Before we dive into some of the bigger issues that are out there in the trade world, I think it's important that we set the record straight. There's a lot of misconceptions out there right now, and there's a nasty little rumor going around saying that trade actually hurts cattle prices. When you look at 2016, the anti-trade sentiment was very strong in the presidential, both presidential platforms. And as a result, that seemed to catch wind in some areas throughout the countryside. Well, the anti-trade argument sounds good on the stump, but when you look at the arguments closely, they simply don't hold water. And for the beef industry, a lot of cattlemen are looking for a cause or a scapegoat to blame for low cattle prices. And protectionist groups are simply preying on those fears and are calling for old, failed protectionist policies to save cattle prices. One of those misconceptions is simply this, that if MCOOL, or mandatory country of origin labeling, were still in place, if it had not been repealed, it could have protected the U.S. market from these declining prices. In addition to that, is that MCOOL would have stopped the flood of imports from Brazil, and that would have stopped the cause of downward cattle prices. Well, this is simply a red herring argument for these protectionists, so we're going to explore that with just a few facts. Now, first of all, if you look at cattle prices, the claim is made that cattle prices were actually higher under MCOOL. Well, that is true, but that doesn't mean that correlation doesn't mean causation. It doesn't mean that simply because the prices were higher during that time that MCOOL was the cause of those. And if you actually look at the data itself, yes, MCOOL, the prices were higher before MCOOL was repealed, but that was primarily due to other factors, like the fact that we had a massive drought that led to strong sales. We also had a very strong dollar. We also had very strong foreign demand for beef. And if you look, those cattle prices also started to fall before MCOOL was repealed. And the other fact of that we shouldn't ignore is that those first Brazilian beef imports didn't arrive until mid-October 2016. Cattle prices had already been trending downward for nearly a year and a half prior to that. I think it's also important to look at the other claim, that MCOOL would have stopped this flood of imports. Well, imports were actually higher under MCOOL than since it's been repealed. We've seen a tremendous decline, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that, facts that are outside of MCOOL, but the fact remains that those imports are down. So when you look at all of these things, it's easy to buy into some of these arguments because they're very simple and they sound good, but they don't seem to hold water. But the truth is that we need trade, and without it, our industry may face even more harsh economic times. The fact of the matter is, right now, our market is saturated with domestic and imported beef, but also proteins from pork and from poultry, and we need to move that product. With 96% of the population living outside the United States, it's important that we find these export markets and we develop them. Now, right now, we only export between 13 to 15% of what we produce. Most of what we produce is here for the U.S. market. But those exports account for $300 per head. And the things that we are exporting include, the simple term is the liquors, tickers, and filters, but the tongues, the hearts, the livers, the kidneys, all the things that American consumers simply don't want, we're able to move to other countries. The other thing is that trade is important because it allows us not only to move that, but to sell it at a premium. And for us, as you're well aware, TPP has been a top priority. And the reason why is because TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, would have leveled the playing field in Japan, and it would have given us leverage over these other countries in the Pacific. But right now, we're losing $400,000 in sales to Japan every day without TPP. And we stand to lose even more market share across Asia as we become less competitive. These trade agreements tear down these foreign barriers and allow us to compete on a level playing field. So what happened? Our plan had been to try to get a vote on TPP during this lame duck. We were hopeful that right now you would be engaged with Congress and we would be seeing a vote come down the line. We were also very hopeful that we would see the rest of the steps forward with China to get that market open. Well, what happened? Well, Election Day happened. November 8th caught everyone off guard. And the anti-trade sentiment played very hard. And right now, a lot of decisions are made based off of political decisions. They're not based off of those hard and true facts and those tough decisions that would be good for us. Right now, people are scared to take a stand on trade, and that's not going to do us any favors in the long run. So as a result, Congress decided to punt on TPP. They didn't take it up, and instead they've decided to punt this to the next administration. And this is it makes it very tough for us because we don't have any other agreements in place that could take the place of what TPP represents. So as Congress punts, we're going to see, as Colin mentioned and Ethan mentioned, we have more regulations coming from the President. But in the trade world, we're on hold. So what's next? Well, on January 20th, President Trump moves in, President Obama moves out. And on day one, President-elect Trump has already stated the following things that he's going to do that are trade-related. The first thing is he's going to notify our NAFTA partners of his intention to either renegotiate or withdraw from NAFTA. Now, technically, that requires a 6-month notification period, so we couldn't actually leave NAFTA or dissolve our involvement in NAFTA until at least late July or August. But I think it's important to understand what that actually means. NAFTA created two $1 billion export markets for us, one in Canada, one in Mexico. In Canada, we sell a lot of high-value muscle cuts that Americans also prefer. We sell them at a premium. In Mexico, we sell a lot of other cuts that Americans don't want. And so without this access, where are we going to send that beef? Again, we're already saturated here in the United States, so where are we going to move that in North America without these benefits? And I think it's also important to realize that without that free trade agreement, that means the United States is most likely going to put in place restrictive tariffs. So we're going to raise tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and you guarantee that they're going to do the same thing to us. And we are going to be at the top of that list. So not only are we going to lose two of our top export markets, I think it's also important to know that just because we leave NAFTA doesn't mean that Canada and Mexico do. And so our two trading partners on either side of the border will continue to have unlimited, unfettered trade with each other. And if you think that's not going to put American companies and American workers at a disadvantage, then you're sorely confused. The second point is President Trump has said that he will withdraw from TPP. Well, let's look at that for a second. TPP is technically not in effect, so there's really nothing to withdraw from. It's more of a nominal move. But what it does do is it sends the message to the other TPP countries to go and seek other trade deals. It says the United States is not happy with this and that they're either going to have to renegotiate something that's already taken 5 years to negotiate, or it's going to encourage them to join the Chinese in their RCEP trade agreement, which does not include the United States. It may also encourage Japan to finalize its trade agreement with the European Union. And as you know, the European Union produces a lot of the same goods that we do. They manufacture a lot of the same goods we do. They have a lot of the same financial services and technology that we do. And that could be devastating to the U.S. economy. But I think the most important thing to realize is that there is no alternative to TPP. There is no bilateral trade deal with Japan on the table, and it would take at least 2 to 3 years to negotiate. So that's a very dangerous move to play. Two other points we'll cover very quickly. He has said, and this is a very popular thing, especially among the electorate, is that we're going to name China as a currency manipulator. Well, it's easy to say that, but if you actually look at the criteria established by the U.S. Treasury Department, China only meets one of the 3 criteria to be labeled a currency manipulator. So if we raise tariffs on China without them actually meeting all of those criteria, then you can guarantee they're going to return the favor. And the U.S. and China are each other's leading export markets. So even though we don't have access in there right now, this doesn't mean it's going to give us a lot of leverage to get in there. Matter of fact, it's going to make it very difficult for us. So if you look at the other point, is just some general trade enforcement. I know that Mr. Trump has said he's going to instruct USTR, the Secretary of Commerce, to enforce trade rules and identify the bad actors. It's kind of a catch-all phrase. But the fact is we do need trade enforcement, and NCBA strongly supports that. We strongly supported the Customs Enforcement Act that Congress passed earlier this year, And that gave USTR, the Trade Representative's Office, and the Customs Office the teeth they need to actually enforce the rules of trade. And we're working on some things right now that we can't disclose, but there are some things that we can use with this that will actually give some teeth to this enforcement. It also means that the United States can go to the WTO. We can take these other countries to the WTO, and we can win. We have really good trade lawyers, and of course President Trump has already promised he's going to have the best people in there, so let's get to it. But if you look at it, tariffs, they hurt both sides, not just the other guy. So we have to do everything we can over the next few weeks and the next few months to educate not only this new administration, but members of Congress, because we need them to understand how important trade is to the beef industry. If we want a solution to these cattle markets, then what we need are exports. We need more people competing for our product. We need to get the best price available for our product, and we need to have stronger demand for our product. The best way to do that is to tear down these tariff barriers in other areas. And trade agreements are the best way to do that. So we look forward to working on this. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Scott Yeager. He's our environmental counsel, and he's going to walk through a couple of the other important things that we're working on. Scott?
Thanks, Kent. Well, I'm going to start by talking about the Spcc rule for farms, and that stands for Spill Prevention, Control, and Countermeasures Rule. And this is an EPA regulation that started out some time ago as regulating kind of traditional oil refineries, but in recent years has kind of spread its tentacles out to farms as well. And it's something that was a priority for our members to get fixed. So a great thing I can bring to you today as a piece of news is over the weekend, Congress actually passed the WIN Act, which included an Spcc provision in it, which we are really lobbying for to get in there, that provided some regulatory relief for our members. And what it did is it provided greater flexibility in how farmers and ranchers can store oil containers on multiple parcels of land. And it also provided a complete exemption for animal feed additives from that rule. Because if you look at the rule, the definition of oil is very broad, and it includes things such as tallow and grease, and anything that could really that has a component of oil to it is regulated. So this thing was I wouldn't say a small victory, but it was a good victory for agricultural producers, and it was one of the few things that Congress was able to pass here at the end of the year, and we're proud of that. As far as what's going to happen in the future with Spcc, this is an issue that it's probably going to come back in the next Congress because EPA is required by law to propose a rulemaking to change the threshold for what size farms they regulate. Right now, it's currently being regulated at a 6,000 gallon threshold, but we're expecting EPA to change that to a 2,500 gallon threshold, which is the minimum that it can be set to. And that's due to a provision in the 2014 WOTUS bill, which required that. So we're going to be looking to those champions in Congress in the 115th Congress who are really been great to us in the past and have wanted to work with us to fix this issue, and there'll be more to see of this. WOTUS has been a priority issue for NCBA for the past 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, so it's been around for a while. Currently we're part of a lawsuit litigating the rule. It's taking a dual track right now. We are litigating it both in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals as well as asking the Supreme Court to take a look at which is the correct court to hear the case in. Right now in the Sixth Circuit, we filed our opening brief back in October, and the Department of Justice filed a response brief pretty recently, and that is going to continue going on here. The Supreme Court, we're expecting to hear back on whether or not they will accept our cert petition at the latest in January. And the path forward here is with the new administration. The new administration has made many statements saying that they would work to repeal this rule, so we'll be working with them to make that happen. And one way that could happen is if the administration decides to hold the case in abeyance, and essentially that would be DOJ standing down on the lawsuit on behalf of the EPA, and then vacating the briefing schedule. And the reason for that is it buys enough time for the new leadership of the EPA to be appointed by the Trump administration and to take a closer look at the WOTUS rule and decide whether or not it should be withdrawn. And then what happens after that, if the administration decides to withdraw the rule, you can expect that there's going to be a lot of lawsuits from environmental groups against that withdrawal, and that'll be tied up in litigation for some time. And in the meantime, we're looking to Congress to actually legislate a definition of WOTUS, or eventually for EPA to issue a new rule that works for landowners. So other issues in 2017, I've got a kind of a batch of different things here, but the kind of resounding tone here is that we're going to be working with the new administration to close the door on some of these issues. So RCRA, that's the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. That is a statute that was created by Congress in the 1970s, along with the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and all the others that we know. And the reason for RCRA was to regulate municipal solid waste landfills. It was never designed to regulate agriculture, but that's exactly what's happening now. In 2015, we had a court case decision in the federal district court that opened the door for environmental activists to sue agricultural producers and use RCRA as the cause of action to say that they're polluting the environment. That's never been the intent of RCRA. In fact, EPA does not enforce RCRA against agriculture. So it's really opened the door to something that has never should have been opened for this statute. And it's something that we've been working on to get fixed legislatively through the Congress. And now with the new administration that wants to fix overregulation and regulatory burden for producers, I think we have a path forward to close the door on this issue. The next bullet down is Clean Water Act 404 Ag Exemption. So that is the dredge and fill permit. And a lot of things you hear about from the media is that agriculture is exempt from the Clean Water Act. That's not accurate. There is an exemption in Section 404, which is the dredge and fill permit, but that is conditioned by something called the Recapture Provision. And what that means is if you're ranching, or if you're farming, or you're conducting silvicultural activity on or near a WOTUS, which is a Waters of the U.S., that actually gets recaptured and you're regulated. You need to get a permit to do that. And that is not the way that the Clean Water Act was designed. It's not the way that the Clean Water Act should be implemented. So we're going to be working to neutralize that in 2017. And then Clean Air Act, third bullet down, greenhouse gas reporting for livestock, and ammonia as a precursor of PM 2.5. So kind of similar here. We're going to be working with the new administration to make sure to close the door on some of these issues. Circular EPCA reporting. This is an issue where environmental groups had sued the EPA to require livestock operations to report any emissions of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide to local emergency response agencies. And in fact, some of our members did that, and they sent it to their local fire departments, and their local fire department said, what am I supposed to do with this? It just doesn't make sense. It's not what CERCLA and EPCA were meant for. So we have an opportunity here with the new administration to close the door on that. And then just beyond that, overall collaborative efforts. We continue to try to make a collaborative partnership effort with EPA to develop that positive dialogue. We'll work with the new administration to branch out other programs at EPA to encourage collaborative rather than regulatory efforts. We continue to support NRCS voluntary conservation programs because those have shown that they can produce results. Our producers like them and they work. And then lastly, getting agency staff out of the office and onto a ranch or feed yard, do farm tours. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Colin, who's going to wrap it up for us.
Well, we do hope this has been very informative and a review of some of the activities here in 2016 and also a quick outlook of what 2017 is going to bring us. One thing that you all need to keep in mind is the only way that we're successful in Washington, D.C. is with your engagement. And there are plenty of ways to come and be engaged. Of course, join us as a member of the NCBA. That is definitely the first and foremost request for us. Then also come and be a part of the discussion. Many of you have heard the old phrase, the world belongs to those who show up. So show up and help us put together the policy that we use here in Washington, D.C. to implement the will and the desires and the policy priorities of the U.S. cattle industry. A couple of opportunities to do that here very soon. Coming up February 1st through 3rd in Nashville is the Cattle Industry Annual Convention and Trade Show. And then come to Washington, D.C. for our 2017 Legislative Conference, March 28th and 30th. And then our summer business meeting, where we really dive into the policy of this association, being held the 13th to the 16th of July in Denver. It is imperative that you show up and you be a part of the process, because that's the only way the policy of this association truly reflects the desires of our membership and also the need of where this industry should go. So with that, we appreciate your engagement with us here tonight, and I think we're going to move into some questions. So I'm going to kick it back over to Kevin. So Kevin.
Yep. Thank you, Colin, and thank you to all our presenters. NCBA is committed to working for a strong future for the U.S. cattle industry. I want to thank our DC staff for all their hard work each day on our behalf. On a personal note, I have the opportunity to work with them, and I'm proud to say that they are a smart, talented bunch of go-getters, and it's a great opportunity to watch them at work every day, and as they do their work to represent us while we're back on the ranches and farms trying to stay in business. So Colin, to your staff, thank you for everything you guys do. As we move into our question and answer session, I want to take a moment and invite everyone, as Colin was mentioning, to the upcoming Cattle Industry Convention being held February 1 through the 3rd in Nashville, Tennessee. But plan to come a day early and participate in the Cattlemen's College Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday morning. That entire convention provides a great opportunity to hear more in-depth information on current issues and opportunities in the cattle industry and help chart the course for our future. Now I'm going to turn it over to Josh White with NCBA to moderate our question and answer session. Wish everybody a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all your families, and thank you again for participating in the webinar tonight. Josh?
Thanks, Kevin. We only have one question so far, but multiple participants have asked it, and that is, could the DC staff, I guess Colin, provide some insight into who may be on the list for Trump's appointment to Secretary of Agriculture?
Well, that is definitely a big topic of conversation right now, because Secretary of Agriculture is one of the last positions that we have seen a nominee for. A lot of names out there. Also a lot of concern associated with that. Some of you may have heard some media reports that the current Democratic Senator from North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp, is in line. That is a name that causes us a lot of concern, given her support for things such as the Gypsy rule and cool. But there are a lot of nominees that are already out there that we are optimistic about. When you look at the Department of the Interior, having current Congressman Ryan Zinke, who is a Republican from Montana, be nominated, we do believe it bodes well for us in what we're trying to do across the West and trying to reform many aspects of the Department of Interior, but especially in our chances of trying to make some true efforts to reform the Endangered Species Act. Over at the EPA, we have the nominee who is the current Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma, Scott Pruitt. Attorney General Pruitt has been very engaged in waters of the United States, CERCLA, EPCRA, and other efforts over the years to push back against EPA. So again, we do believe this is somebody we'll be able to work very closely with, try to make sure that we roll back a lot of the EPA regulations that we have seen over the past couple of administrations that have really hit us hard here in the cattle business. So there is the opportunity to be optimistic about what's going to happen with this new administration in 2017. But I think everybody needs to keep this whole discussion and their whole frame of mind in a very balanced position. You heard from Kent when it comes to trade, which is extremely important to us. The jury's still out when it comes to the president-elect and what his administration is going to do. He could take quite a few moves that would damage us on the trade front. So we're going to be watching very closely who he nominates to become the United States Trade Representative.
Great job, Colin, and you actually addressed another question that came in about trade and would we be able to work with Trump, and I think you already adequately answered. We really don't know. Another question that that I think is on a lot of people's minds that's texted in here. What are best estimates for tax law changes such as the gift taxes, death tax, other exemptions that ag enjoys with the new administration?
That's a great question, and that's one area where we really did not expect to be able to engage in 2017. But with the fact that the Republicans have not only the White House, also have both houses of Congress, this is really going to be a great opportunity to do comprehensive tax reform. Had any of the three, the White House, the House of Representatives, or the Senate, been controlled by the Democrats, it would have been a much different story. But we do know that comprehensive tax reform is on the minds of the Republicans. In fact, the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, put out his blueprint for what tax reform should look like last summer. And we do know that with all of the comments we have heard from the President-elect, that's going to be something that they start very quickly on. And this will be the first time that we've had in quite some time to once again tackle the death tax. And so to kind of put it in perspective, it's been over a decade since we have had a real viable opportunity to address the death tax and repeal the death tax. So to be able to have this opportunity to provide for us is exciting. Now, it is not a slam dunk by any means. And that goes back to my earlier conversations about the overall margin in the Senate. You know, there are going to be 52 Republicans starting when the new Congress comes back in January. There are 46 Democrats and 2 independents that caucus with the Democrats. As you heard, it takes 60 votes to move most things. So in order to get that 60 votes, we need to pick up a few Democrats to come along. And that's going to be the challenge with comprehensive tax reform, is trying to find those 8 Democrats required in order to make sure we can break the filibuster, get to the votes, and actually implement this tax reform.
I had a follow-up question on the Secretary of Ag question, specifically about Butch Otter, that he was now being vetted, the Governor of Idaho. Do you have any thoughts on that? Maybe comment on his past record in the U.S. House.
Yeah, more than happy to do that. Butch Otter, who is the Governor of Idaho and a former U.S. Congressman from Idaho, has been a great friend of the U.S. cattle industry. He understands what it is we're trying to do. He understands the issues that we face, not only in the West, but across the country. And so the fact that he is being considered, I think, is a very good thing for us. You know, we're looking for somebody who just understands what agriculture really is, and that it's not just about organic farms. It's not just about having 40 acres, a mule, and a patch of carrots being irrigated by rainwater. That it takes true innovational agriculture that utilizes production technologies in order to make sure that we can not only feed ourselves, but feed the world. And I do believe that Governor Otter is somebody who appreciates that and would bring that perspective into this role as Secretary of Agriculture.
All right, that's all the questions we have. We're pushing up against an hour here, so I guess everybody's ready to go watch some football or enjoy some holiday festivities. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, DC team, for doing a great job as always, keeping us informed, and happy holidays, everyone. Hope to see you at convention.